Hello, I'm Jon Quigley. I'm sorry, you got to edit that out. Hello, I'm Jon Quigley, Jon M Quigley. Today we're going to talk about the role of critical thinking in project management. First, a little about me. I have an engineering degree and multiple master's degrees from West Coast University. I'm on the advisory board of Forsyth Tech, and I've been on the advisory board for Master of Project Management advisory board for Western Carolina University. I teach distance learning, I teach business to business, and I've taught at a number of local technical schools and community colleges. I have 7 patents that I've ceded to the companies at which I have worked, and 2 technical awards through Volvo Trucks. I have 2 globally recognized certifications, of which one of them is the PMP, the Project Management Professional from PMI, and I have written 9 books, co-authored 9 books. I've contributed to like 4 others, and written scores of articles for various magazines, amounting to about 50 different publications. Today we're going to talk about clarity of thinking when it comes to our project work, but it's not really limited to our project work. And it's not only for the project manager, but also for the team, the project team members, and the business at large. In fact, can you think of an instance where being able to think critically or logically is not a desired attribute? Even in our personal lives, we want to make the best decisions based on the facts, not necessarily make the decision from a position of delusion, and so subtle of delusion that we have no idea we are not really thinking clearly about this. Businesses, to remain viable, need to have the preponderance of the decisions to be good decisions, or even great decisions. If you've seen smart or intelligent people make decisions you just did not understand or walking away shaking your head, you have probably witnessed some of the things we're going to talk about today. Why do we need to know? Project management is not some vapid gazing at crystal ball to determine the best course of action. The end result of the project is based on some of the decisions made throughout, but especially in the early phases. There are studies that indicate that decisions made in the first 90 days will have the greatest consequences on the project's success. This is often where scope and strategy are determined. The decisions we make based upon facts, or at least clear thinking, or at least they should be. Now that may sound sort of trivial, but our brains do not work with clarity at all times, and I'm not talking about the odd glass of wine or some IPA or a good shot of whiskey. There are 2 categories of thinking that get in the way of truly understanding and making decisions on the merits. One of them is called the logical fallacy. And I encourage you to go check out the site, knowyourlogicalfallacy.com. According to them, a logical fallacy is a flaw in reasoning. Logical fallacies are like tricks or illusions of thought, and they're often very sneakily used by politicians or other people, managers, and the media to fool people. We're not going to talk about logical fallacies today. We're going to take a look at a more subtle impediment, one of which we are often not aware. That is cognitive bias. And from the website, Your Bias Is, and I encourage you to check that one out as well, cognitive biases make our judgments irrational. We have evolved to use shortcuts in our thinking, which are often useful, but a cognitive bias means there's a kind of misfiring going on, causing us to lose objectivity. In a busy life, shortcuts are no doubt helpful. They allow us to minimize risk while maximizing throughput or achievement. Also reduces cognitive load. However, like everything taken to the extreme, or unaware of the consequences, there are limits, and there is a downside. Cognitive biases make our judgments irrational. We have evolved to use shortcuts in our thinking, which are often useful, but the cognitive bias is a disconnect between a shortcut and our objective. Shortcut is not one we thought about consciously. That's what makes it so insidious. But one in which the brain takes over effectively, taking us down a shortcut path of which we have no awareness. We're going to review a few of those biases and how they can impact the project. Anchoring bias. Human minds are associative in nature. So in order to receive the information, the order in which we receive the information helps determine the course of our judgments and perceptions. As a project example, have you ever been asked for an impromptu estimate of cost or duration, or both? And then when the project moves forward, that haphazard impromptu guess now becomes a starting point for negotiation. This is an example of anchoring bias. Once the value of this anchor is set, all future negotiations, arguments, estimates, etc. are discussed in relation to this anchor. This bias occurs when interpreting future information using this anchor. And it's clear when you made this impromptu estimate, you had no idea of the scope. Having learned more about the scope, you should know more about the estimate quality. I'm sure many of us know what sunk cost is, but we will review it just in case. Sunk cost is money or time or effort put toward some goal or objective that we cannot get back when we realize neither are we going to meet the goal or the objective. So essentially that money is gone, or that time is wasted. It's sunk into this thing. The money and effort is gone, but since we have already sunk something into this, we find it logically difficult to just walk away. So we consider sinking more into it. In time, we end up sinking so much into it, perhaps the project then becomes success. But the reality is we have wasted a lot more money than the business case made sense for. I've seen this one argued on Twitter that once you've spent the money is gone. So essentially that is a zero. So now you're reevaluating the project based on the new estimates of what it takes to reach success. You can see how this becomes a giant sinkhole for money, for time. Optimism bias. There can be benefits, or no, to be sure there are benefits for having a positive attitude, but it is unwise to allow such an attitude to adversely affect our ability to make rational judgments. They're not mutually exclusive. And this one, in my opinion, is very insidious. People are generally positive thinking. Wishful thinking can be a tragic irony insofar as it can create more negative outcomes, such as the case of problem gambling. Project managers tend to be optimistic, and as an aside, so do software engineers. It is part of working with people and maintaining morale, and to be sure, this is required. I mean, that's part of the hygiene of the group is mental hygiene, and team hygiene are part of what keeps a group moving forward in a good way. However, optimism is like wearing distorting glasses and is not an effective strategy for meeting the demands of the day, either in work or personal life. You still have to think it through and make some rational decision. Opposite of optimism bias is pessimism bias. Pessimism is a defense mechanism against disappointment, or it can be the result of depression or anxiety disorders. Pessimists often justify their attitude by saying they'll either be vindicated or pleasantly surprised. However, a pessimistic attitude may also have limit potential positive outcomes. Pessimism is something very different to skepticism. Skepticism is the desire to remain impartial, and pessimism is the fear that something bad is going to happen no matter what we do, and skepticism is the desire to remain impartial and look at the facts and figure out what's going to happen. It is difficult for a project to move forward when it is espoused and propagated by the team, or even a fraction of the team, as doom and gloom. We will not take calculated risks because rather than take time to consider risk versus reward, we will decide not to try anything at all because it will end in failure or some other bad outcome. Sort of like working next to Marvin the robot from Hitchhiker's Guide. Fundamental attribution error is the tendency for people to overemphasize personal characteristics and ignore situational factors in judging others' behavior. For example, for us personally, we focus on situational factors like being late to a meeting because of a prior meeting or a hectic schedule. But for others, they cannot arrive on time due to some character flaw or thinking poorly about those that are attending the meeting. In other words, they can't manage their schedule very well. Some intrinsic flaw in that other person. Can we think of problems that may arise from automatically attributing to others the worst intrinsic motivation? This sort of thinking can get in the way of team development and team cohesiveness. Curse of knowledge. Things make sense once they make sense. No matter what we'd like to believe, this did not happen for us overnight. It took many interactions, experiences, and perhaps study to get to the point where we have the knowledge on this topic. In project management, the way we talk to our people and set the level of expectation about transfer of understanding may be unreasonably high. A coach or teacher may lose patience with a student since the coach assumes the student has the requisite background information. A team member may see the writing on the wall with this particular project and believes we should all see that writing on the wall, and then gets frustrated when nobody else can, because the team members are missing the requisite knowledge that got that person to this point. It's not as simple, can't you all see this? Halo and horns effect. Our judgments are associative and automatic. And so if we want to be objective, we need to consciously control for irrelevant influences. This is especially important in a professional setting. Things like attractiveness can unduly influence issues as important as a jury deciding someone's guilt or innocence. If someone is successful or fails in one area, this can also unfairly color our expectations of them in other areas. The halo effect is where we transfer what we believe is good about a person to all things about that person. For example, we see their giving nature, and therefore they're giving, and they're smart, and they're well communication. They communicate well. And contrary to that, the horns effect is exact opposite. They do one thing wrong, and everything they carry around with them is that person's just got all these problems in your eye. Ingroup bias. Projects are resource bound. That is, there is often limited time, money, and other company resources dedicated to the work. This should come as no surprise to anybody. It can also be true that the work is not performed by one group, but a collection of groups. In my experience, that is more often the case. In product development, for example, one group does some work, passes their work on to the next group in the chain, and so on until the product is out the door. Each of the groups rely on the other, but in-group biases can get in the way of effective team development. When it comes to decisions about what needs to happen at the entire level of a product or project, we have team members whose voices are strongest to something that impacts them best, rather than looking at the entirety of the project scope of the outcome. In-group bias can pit one group or team against another team. We are better than them. Their work came into us poorly, things like that. We do no wrong, and everybody else, any other team does. Groupthink. Irving Janis pioneered the initial research on the groupthink theory. Put it this way, groupthink is a quick and easy way to refer to a mode of thinking that persons engage in when concurrence seeking becomes so dominant in a cohesive in-group that it tends to override realistic appraisal of alternative courses of action. You might think that team cohesiveness that should be a good thing for projects and project management. That's not always true. To ensure the best idea, strategy, or tactic is selected, it is good to get more than one idea on the table and critique them all, finding the optimum answer to the question. When we groupthink, we have such an aversion to any kind of conflict that we don't even propose these other alternative ideas. And we may be conditioned by that in the course of this team's interactions over time, that any opposing view has been crushed over time, so that any dissenting opinion now becomes, they toe the line. So that the entire team thinks the same, essentially, or at least they vocalize they think the same. It doesn't allow for the space for dissenting opinions to be explored and understood, which in itself is a team in creating an optimum team environment where the team members are free to speak and the ideas they bring to the table are reviewed, critiqued, and judged accordingly. Confirmation bias. This is one of my favorites. And my favorite story to consider for confirmation bias is to suggest that the sun comes out of the Atlantic Ocean. And so you go to Wilmington or Topsail Island or something like that, and you watch the sun come out of the ocean. And therefore, you have confirmed that the sun comes out of the ocean. We all know that's not true, but if you enter the discussion with this evidence, we would still believe the sun came out of the ocean. And we had something that looked like it. The sun appears to come out of a body of water. That's what confirmation bias is like. In project management, any endeavor really, when we seek evidence that supports our assumptions or assertions, we have really done nothing. We have considerable evidence that suggests something that still does not necessarily make it so. Consider how we handle hypotheses. If we find evidence that supports our hypothesis, we still do not know if what we think to be true is actually true. However, if we find one piece of evidence that refutes, well, that hypothesis is invalid, or at least a portion of that hypothesis is invalid. I suggest it is in project manager's best interest to seek refutation of what you believe. If you find that, you know you are on the wrong track. You're thinking incorrectly. If you find something that supports what you think, you might be okay, but you might not be as well. For example, have we seen product failures reported? Therefore, the product For example, have we seen no product failures reported? Therefore, the product should be launched. Is this valid? What if we have not started testing yet? You see? There's no failures because you haven't started testing yet. Launch, and then they start testing, and you find bugs or defects in the product. Dunning-Kruger Effect. This is a quote attributed to Mark Twain. We should be careful to get out of an experience only the wisdom that is in it, and stop there, lest we be like the cat that sits down on a hot stove lid. She will never sit down on a hot stove lid again, and that is well, but she will never sit down on a cold one anymore. Because experts know just how much they don't know, they tend to underestimate. Because experts know just how much they don't know, they tend to underestimate their ability. But it's easy to be overconfident when you have only a simple idea of how things are. Try not to mistake the cautiousness of experts as a lack of understanding, nor to give much credence to lay people who appear confident, but have only superficial knowledge. Dunning-Kruger Effect is effect which people with low cognitive ability on a topic mistakenly assess their capability as greater than it is. That gives a cognitive bias illusion of superiority at times from the inability of the low ability people to recognize their lack of ability. Then, on the other hand, people of high ability incorrectly assume that tasks they are easy for them are also easy for other people. The cognitive bias is illusory superiority results from an internal illusion in people of low ability and from an external misperception of people of high ability. That is, the miscalibration of the incompetent stems from an error about the self, whereas the miscalibration of the highly competent stems from an error about others. Reactance. Now, this one's a good one. When I was a lot younger, I was a little bit like this. You don't like feeling constrained. So anything that appears to constrain or limit you, you immediately react to. When we feel like we're being constrained, our inclination is to resist. However, in doing so, we can overcompensate. While blind conformity is far from an ideal way to approach things, neither is knee-jerk contrarianism. While blind conformity is far from the ideal way to approach things, neither is being a knee-jerk contrarian. Belief bias. In belief bias, we judge an argument on how strongly we support the conclusion and not the strength of the argument. The problem is, the argument should be what drives the conclusion, not the conclusion the argument. This impacts project management when we attempt to find a solution for those times when our project must select a strategy or tactic to accomplish the project objective. The team needs to critique the argument to understand if the conclusion can be made from that argument. Otherwise, the argument is incorrect. Putting our project eggs in a strategy or tactic in which the argument is flawed will likely end in failure. Clustering illusion. In clustering illusion, we see things in the data that are not really true. We see Jesus in a piece of toast, for example. Small runs produce data, and we are back to the human brain trying to make a pattern from that data. In project management, we may see a pattern in the early data interpretation and we may take action upon it. However, what we see is not necessarily true. Our inference from the dots on the screen become a pattern that may not really be sustainable over time or may not in fact be valid. Over time, more data arrives and we see that what we saw as a pattern is in fact not a pattern at all. And we should change our strategy or tactic. So the key to this one is understanding that a few dots doesn't necessarily a pattern make. Survivor bias. Survivor bias leads us to a faulty conclusion about what works by excluding those strategies that failed. It is possible, and perhaps even likely, that the strategy you wish to take for this project was employed on many other projects that failed. By only looking at the successful projects, we attribute to success those things that may have had nothing to do with that project's success. For example, let's say we're looking at all the successful projects and we consider attribute A. But since we're only looking at the successful projects, we assume that attribute A is attributed only to the successful projects. However, if we would have been looking at the failed projects, we would likewise see that attribute A has been employed on those projects as well. So you can't say that this project was successful because of attribute A. To eliminate this bias, we need to consider the entire range of events, both the failures and successes, identifying the common thread, if there is any, and comparing the results across both of the successes and the failures. There are considerable challenges in project management. The facts are, when it comes to seeing the entire situation, problem, or obstacle, a diversity of perspective is often quite helpful. This diversity are things like applicable experience from the team members, variation in technical disciplines, and many others. A discussion on the topic with these disparate perspectives and often an open discourse can help uncover these biases. I'm brought back to the Carnegie thinking of the open mental model or mental models. The more you put these models up for review, the more the assumptions can be critiqued, and the underlying assumptions can be discovered and critiqued. It is helpful to remain skeptical and take time to think through what you're getting ready to do. You are in charge of your brain as much as you can be anyway. I would like to thank you for allowing me this, Brianne. I'm Jon Quigley. If you enjoyed this presentation, please check out our website, our blog posts, our YouTube channel. Thank you.